Thank you so much for our last panel. That was incredible. It was fascinating listening to that. One of the things I take from it is, if there was a church of hope, that's the new religion that I'd be joining. I think that's so important that we have to continue that theme of hope and trust as well.
Yep.
You know, I think if we're going to deal with the existential threat of climate change, we need trust. We need to gain the trust of the global south. For too long, the global north has done as we pleased and not really had to face the consequences. And this is a massive, massive challenge. Now listen, before we move on, I know this is a hot ticket in Washington, D.C. Everyone wants to be here. Everyone wants to be in these seats. But I've been reliably told that there is overflow seating at the Milton Theatre. So if you haven't got a seat here and you need somewhere to sit, head to the Milton Theatre. Someone outside will guide you in that direction to get some overflow seating. Before we move on to the next section, which is on women's capital and getting money into small businesses, Andrea, tell us about yourself. You have a small business. You're a small business owner. You know, talk to us about the pitfalls, what it's like, and, you know, trying to get capital as well.
I mean, look, everybody who knows anything about small business knows that raising capital is a very hard thing for anybody in business, but it's especially hard for women. I mean, and there's such a dichotomy, right? Because look, here in the US alone, women own 39% of all businesses, okay? The tune of the revenue of those small businesses generates about $2.7 trillion annually. So that's quite a bit of money. From 2019 to 2023, women-owned businesses outpaced, the growth of women-owned businesses outpaced men by 2 to 1. Male-led businesses. But here's what's curious. Women get access, if anybody could take a guess of the percentage of access to venture capital that female, there it is, 1.9%. I mean, that's a bit of a mind meld, right? That's a little bit of a hard one to swallow. Globally, the story is not very different. Women own 1 in 3 businesses, but in every region of the world except for North America, women have lesser access to financial services than men do. So how can you get access to such needed capital for your business when you're a woman, when you don't even access to basic banking? It's a huge problem. It's why I'm so excited for the next panel.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing some of that knowledge as well. It's such a weird conundrum, you know, when women bring so much to the table.
Yeah, give a woman a dollar, we've all heard it.
Yep, we need to change that. And as you say, to continue this discussion, we're going to have a fantastic panel, and I'd like to invite Rosario Dawson, Ashoka, I love it, Fatoumata Bâ, and Melinda French Gates to the stage.
Please give them a warm welcome.
Wow.
Well, as we just heard Andrea say, it is really hard for women to get their businesses capitalized, both in the United States and around the world. And yet there is so much opportunity. So we are sitting here at the World Bank meetings where a lot of macro issues are being discussed about policy and finance. We also, though, as a group of women, want to bring to light what is possible and what we see when you connect women-led entrepreneurs or businesses to funds. So I'm going to start first with Fatoumata. Please talk a little bit about your business. You left the tech industry to start a venture capital fund. You capitalize many businesses across Africa. Tell us a bit about that business and what you're seeing in your work.
Thank you, Melinda. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure being with you today. Well, 11 years ago, I indeed co-founded what is today Africa's largest e-commerce marketplace, which later became the first unicorn, and we got public a few years back. We were praised and celebrated, but at that time I actually could not sleep at night because what was keeping me awake was really some rather shocking numbers. So as you know, in the African continent, we create roughly 3 million jobs per year when we need to create 3 million jobs per month to be able to give decent economic opportunities to your youth. But the way it's done is quite striking because you have the highest entrepreneurship activity for female in Africa, so at 26%. Yet, that's where you have the highest funding gap. I think the African Development Bank says that we have a $42 billion funding gap for female entrepreneurs in Africa. And if we were to bridge that gap in any ways, McKinsey says that by 2025, we'll unlock 300 billion extra GDP, which is huge for Africa. It's like 10% extra GDP. It's like 10 times the GDP of my country, Senegal. So that's how we started. And Janngo means tomorrow in Fulani, because we were dreaming of a world that was more equal, especially in terms of access to capital. And we were launched with a vision to be the largest gender equal tech fund. And a few years down the line, we have been able to deploy more than 35 million euros in 18 businesses that are female-led in Africa that have now created 20,000 jobs and provided access to essential services, products, or even financial services to 6.5 million people in Africa. And that's really what today is making me happy to be here.
Yeah, so the multiplier effect, which is I think what we're here to discuss also. And for instance, one thing our foundation did recently is we surveyed 100,000 women in Kenya and Nigeria, 2 other countries on the continent. And the number one thing they said they wanted was access to capital because they had a small business or had an idea to create a business. So when you think about the knock-on effect for jobs and what it does for the economy, it's enormous, as you said. Rosario, you are also an activist and you work in West Africa on fashion. Tell us a bit about how you see this issue and how it's playing out in your business.
Well, we first off just want to say it's wonderful to be here as well, specifically talking about this issue because it is absolutely striking that there is no equity, there is no gender equality in any country on this planet. So this is an issue that needs to be addressed worldwide. And I'm always curious to see which ism has a preference, racism, sexism, capitalism. And in this one, we know we are leaving $6 trillion on the table by not investing in women. And so obviously then the sexism is winning. And that's something that's got to change because the math isn't mathing and we all need a lot of support. We've seen a lot of countries suffer over these just past couple of years and so many things turning down. So as we see that 2% in investment, that goes to women at all, and it's only 0.006 that goes to women of color here in the United States. We clearly have our work to do worldwide. So my business partner, Abrima, and I, we're both New Yorkers. I took her to Democratic Republic of Congo in 2011. I'm on the board of V-Day. V, formerly the Evensler of the Vagina Monologues, was started at a place called the City of Joy in the Congo after meeting now Nobel Prize winner Denis Mukwege, who has been working against fistula, FGM, and the terrible atrocities that happen to women with rape because of conflict mineral mines in the Congo, because that's where the coltan, tungsten, tin that is in all our cell phones is still coming from the majority. And we saw like the space that was built by these women, that was designed by these women, they were being supported to understand they were no less Congolese and important just because they were women. They started voting, they started doing their own businesses, they started getting into agriculture. And this is not just regular agriculture, they're doing sustainable, regenerative agriculture. That's one of the things when you invite women into the space, they tend to really address social issues in a very large way. And the effect has been tremendous. There's over 2,000 graduates from that space. But what we saw was that women were being invested in, and then they were investing in their communities. And so we started Studio 189 to do that exact same thing. Abrima came from a background from Hermes and Bottega Veneta, and it was like, so when we get something from a country like Italy that is told to us to have value, we automatically raise our price. But when it comes from someplace, any country in Africa, we think it's charity, and all of it suddenly plummets. A huge problem, and so our whole motto is is work, not charity. And it's very much about knowing that investing in women has an absolute accumulative effect. So just a couple of examples. Helen, who started working with us, we got our first grant, we kind of soft launched in 2013. Helen was the first woman that we hired. We got a grant that allowed us to get our sewing machine and get her to work with us. And she was very timid and shy. Then we were able to open up a factory with the UN Ethical Fashion Initiative in North Kineshi. She didn't want to work in the factory. She was very nervous about that. She ended up working in the factory, assisting the manager there, becoming the manager, going to school, meeting her husband. She went to Blue Cross University to get her designer degree. She moved into our space that we had, a Studio 189 sort of place to be near by the factory. She ended up taking that over. She has her own business now. She's paying for her kids to go to college. Same thing with Aggie, our first batiker, who's now her daughter's getting her master's degree. She was able to move from Cape Coast to the outskirts of Ghana to Accra. And we've seen that over and over again from the housemaid that we work with. Like every single one, we speak into them. And that's a lot of what we keep encountering. It's not just access to capital, it's the resources, it's the network, it's the community, it's the encouragement. Because getting those funds is really critical, but they also tend to be women who are taking care of the family, who have a lot more response. So the school fees and being able, not having infrastructure, so you can't even, the roads aren't usable. Like there are so many obstacles just to even getting to work with climate change that is continuing to affect, with instability with countries. We were getting materials from a country that had just had a coup d'etat. And these folks like got on a motorcycle and still brought it because they needed that money. And so the interest is there, and as you were saying, in Africa, across the continent, a quarter of the women are entrepreneurs. That is tremendous. And so investing in those women, I've been able to see that individually, one-on-one, what an impact that can make. And we're trying to make a change in fashion in general because it's the second largest polluter on the planet. And our small little company can't make that dent, but we continue to work with and push the larger retailers around us to make an impact and a difference that can, again, kind of scale down to everyone.
I love the point that you're making, that we see women take the money and invest in other places, health, education of their children, something for the community. And you're right, it's in the group collective often that women find the strength and support. India, so many countries want to move from low to middle income. Of course they do. And if you think of India that made that transition in 2006, one of the things they did many years ago were to start women's self-help groups. And then they realized if they started to give access to capital to those women, they would start numerous businesses. So they now have loans out to 42 million women-led businesses. And it was some government funding of small loans with a decent repayment rate, not a 40% interest that you pay back literally every week. I see that in Africa. But they started to see it work at scale. And when you look at countries like India or Peru, it was to go from low to middle income, it was part of getting this part of the informal economy working. So I'm going to turn to you again, Fatoumata. And can you talk a little bit about what you see with your venture fund, what types of businesses women are bringing forward, and then what the knock-on effects are as well?
Well, when it comes to gaps, I mentioned the funding gap, but there are so many other gaps that we see and that we are trying to tackle and to solve with those female entrepreneurs. So, for instance, in terms of geographies, you have today 4 countries that are concentrated more than 90% of the VC funding, and we invest under the assumption that tech can help leapfrog development, which means it's even more needed in fragile states. So, what we do specifically about it is, for instance, today our portfolio is 54% francophone. Usually, francophone entrepreneurs, female or male, attract between 3 to 8%. So it's a massive change for them. The second thing that's very important is when you're trying to raise capital in Africa, usually it's easier if you do financial services or energy. But if you are trying to do education, healthcare, or fashion, again, it's tougher. And that's why often has been sector agnostic and backing entrepreneurs doing all sorts of tech or tech-enabled platforms in all sectors, because we believe that tech is really an horizontal. Another thing that's very important is really the ticket size, right? So if you're trying to raise as a female entrepreneur for the first time, you may have friends or family money, or if you have a large business, you may have banks or PE. But we see a missing middle between, for instance, we invest between 50,000 and 5 million euros to take them from the idea stage to a growth stage. And just to give you a concrete example, I'm just back from Nigeria. I flew from Lagos, where I was at the beginning of the week. And we backed them there Anu, who launched a platform called Sabi. So Sabi was launched 2.5 years ago under the belief that you have all these small mom-and-pop store owners in Nigeria and overall across Africa that need to access quality inventory and then to sell it to their own customers. So she's digitizing that. So in less than 3 years, she has almost 200,000 SMEs trading on the platform. 75% are female. And most excitingly for us, because basically they are able to have sales history on the platform, it's like a track record for them to build credit scoring. So now they have access to funding and they're able to scale. And when you survey them about the impact, they don't tell you, I was given digital tools. They tell you, now I make maybe twice average Nigerian salary, and I can be, I have gained power and dignity in my household. And this is really what keeps us going. And on the financial side as well, because to me, it's a matter of equity, but it's also a business case. Women entrepreneurs are bankable. So my impact fund is supposed to return between 2 and 3% and 3 times the capital in 10 years to our backers. With Sabi, we are able to return 10 times in 2 years. So they are here. We need to trust them. Ideas are here, the talent is here, but the inequality and the access to capital isn't here at scale. So I'm hoping that today, through this conversation and many that are happening around the spring meetings, we'll be able to unlock also at macro level.
Great. That's so great. I love the market returns, because I think when we see strong market returns, then you start to see other investors crowd in because it's good business. And who's doing the buying these days in middle and high income countries? It's women. Women are the ones that have the buying power, that purchase things for their children, purchase things for the household, purchase things for themselves. So, and yet there's still so much bias in the system.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that a little bit, Rosario, because even if you bring it home here in the United States, talk a little bit about some of the biases that you see.
Oh, it's tragic. I mean, we have Voto Latino. We are the largest youth voter organization. 60% of the women that are young women that we register tend to be non-college graduated. And, their first thing that they're worried about is housing. All of them are concerned with reproductive rights. And no one's speaking to them, and they can't tell you which party is even trying to take it, because they're so overwhelmed and so stressed with their day-to-day, their now, that they can't even fathom what's happening outside of that sphere and how that can make an impact. And so for me, that's one of the things we talk about, is that we do have avenues to make a difference and an impact, voting obviously being one of them. But we need to, the systemic change that we need to do worldwide is critical, and we need people hitting on that. But we need to be very targeted and specific. So I'm working on a film in the cannabis space. I got Colin Kaepernick to co-produce it with me, a short film, talking about women in cannabis. Now, this is 30,000 practitioners are working, where we've got 6 million people who are using for 15 different types of ailments. We've got now suburban women across America who are taking their gummies before they go to bed. There's the stigma is gone, and yet people are still in jail. Last Prisoner Project is still trying to get people's rights expunged and get people out. This is a specific space that we know when you talk about the war on drugs, where it's very, very clear that women of color should be leading. They should have 50% of that space. And when we get into cannabis, it's even worse, those numbers. It's billions of dollars, only 1% is going to communities of color, and when it goes to women, it's barely, you can't even know what that number is, it doesn't exist. Raising $100,000 is a big deal. So this is something that I'm very excited about, because it gets a very tangible result that we can start looking at. How can we invest? How can we deschedule cannabis? Amber Center, who's someone I've invested in, is here today. They're doing lobbying in Congress today, talking specifically about descheduling and making a big impact, because this is something that we've seen that's affected communities for generations. And so for me, it's that we have to be multi-pronged about our approach. We have to invite women into the conversation. That's what we're trying to do with Voto Latino. I've invested in my friend's company, Ebby, Empowered by You. Her whole thing is, that just be so good that they can't ignore you. But that's a wonderful thing. It's a Steve Martin quote, for those who know. But we have to make it very clear to folks that they're leaving not just money on the table, but they're leaving progress on the table. They're leaving opportunity on the table, and that's gonna be something that's gonna affect us, not just our Millennium Goals and our our climate change kind of goals, but just our human goals. Like what is possible for our kids to feel hopeful? Because it's daunting and really scary to see young people. So the mental health is through the roof. We've seen that in tremendous ways. And these are kids who are looking at having a shorter lifespan, shorter access to capital, shorter progress in their own potential and success in their own lives than their own parents and their grandparents. So we're heading in a downward trajectory, and we have a lot of opportunity through online portals, through digital, being able to understand that the systems of monetary stuff has all been created at the top, but we need to create something from the bottom up that meets people where they're at.
Yeah, I love the connecting the grassroots to the top down. One of the things you brought up was women's reproductive rights. We know that there is literally no country in the world that has not gone from low to middle income or middle to high income without making sure first women have access to birth control. And if you roll that back, if you roll that back, then women can't get an education. They can't finish their degree. They can't start a business. So we have to start with women's health and then education and jobs. I think back in our own country in the United States, when I was growing up and 10 years old, was the first time that women were able to open a bank account without their husband's signature.
In the 70s, it's so crazy.
In the 70s, in this country. So we have to break down and change these laws and change what is possible. And I loved what you said. The foundation put out a white paper recently that says women are asking us for $1.7 trillion of capital because they know they can turn it into $6 trillion. And that is something that the World Bank can do. Just to close out here, Fatoumata, close us out with the most hopeful story you've seen in the last few years on the continent of a woman entrepreneur.
Well, I actually wanted to leave you with two things, and I think it's some of all the stories that I've seen. The first thing is we've built the case and showed you the case on how female entrepreneurs, especially African female entrepreneurs, were a solution to bring financial returns and social returns, but also in terms of environmental returns. You know, I wrote a white paper for the World Economic Forum a couple of years back showing that there's a growing body of evidence showing a correlation between having more women managers in companies and the carbon footprint trajectory. And for instance, you have studies showing that when you have 1% more female managers, in general, the trajectory of carbon reduction goes by 0.5% down. So women can even be a solution for climate change. And what I've seen over the years is we have all the ideas, the talent is here, but the speed and scale are missing. So I think this is really a call to action, to have a higher sense of urgency. With compounding challenges, we're always seeing the female gender equality agenda, sliding because we have wars and we have inflation, but it actually has to be center stage because it can be a solution for all the compounding challenges, and I wanted to leave you with that.
Great. So just to finish, I would say I think what you've heard from us is that if with the speed and the scale, if we capitalize women and we open up their entrepreneurial nature and their possibility, we're going to have an amazing compounding effect around the world. Thank you, Rosario. Thank you, Fatoumata. Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and the numbers are there. 10% more return on those loans and 10% higher than their male counterparts in revenue. So let's go.
There you go.